Hi, thanks for joining me. Today I'm off exploring the Isle of Axholme on Goldie. This is an area in northwest Lincolnshire, to the west of Scunthorpe and north of Gainsborough. We'll be visiting a number of towns and villages that lie in this ancient administrative area, and as usual I'll chuck in a few bits of information and some tales as we go. We're starting off in the old market town of Crowell. That's right at the top of the isle. This is the market square, and the fancy building in the centre of the picture there, that's the old market hall, built in 1870. We'll take a short run through the back streets before heading out, as there's a nice old church building not far away. They're out taking new footage for Google Earth Street View at the moment. That's the second time I've followed the camera car this morning. I'll have to have a look on Street View around Crowell and see if me and Goldie are famous. Don't know how long it takes them to update it though, probably a long time. Must be a pretty boring job that, just driving round every street in the UK. Don't think I'd like it. This is the Church of St Oswald's. It's a Grade 1 listed building. It's also home to the Crowell Stone. The Crowell Stone's a section of Anglo-Saxon cross bearing runic inscriptions. It survives because it was reused when the church underwent some rebuilding by Norman masons back in the 12th century. This is a very old town, and there's evidence of settlements in the area from the Neolithic and Bronze Age periods, but grouping together to form a community probably dates from Anglo-Saxon times. During the Second World War, Crowell had a prisoner of war camp that housed Italian POWs. Crowell Grange, which is just outside the town, has a concrete apron in front of it that was built by the POWs in 1945. It's got an inscription carved into it by the builders. We're heading out of Crowell now on the A161, and the main road bypasses the old village of Eland. The bridge here is taking us over the railway and also the Stainforth and Cadeby Canal. We followed some of this canal in one of my earlier videos. It's heading out to the west and joins the River Trent at Cadeby. We're going straight across at this roundabout. We're actually crossing the A18, which is going from Doncaster to Scunthorpe. We've just passed Hurst Priory on the right there, That's an 18th century country house that was built on the site of the 12th century priory. It's a wedding and events venue now and a huge golf course. So what is the Isle of Axholme? It's an area of land, over 50,000 acres actually, that was formerly mainly marshland with areas of high ground here and there. The towns and villages grew up on the higher spots. The name Isle of Axholme evolved from a mixture of Celtic, Saxon and Danish words. It's thought to have originally been called Haxey Hood, then Axholme and finally Axholme. Ax means water and I means island. That in turn became Axel. The home bit was added by the Danes and is either an island or bank near water or high ground within a marsh. So we end up with Axholme. The Isle prefix came much later. That's a modern addition. Back in the early 1600s, the Dutch engineer Cornelius Vermeulen undertook the job of draining the land to reclaim it under instruction from King Charles I. There's more about Vermeulen and the drainage work in an earlier video I did. I'll put a link to it at the end in case anybody's interested. Now this draining did have many long-term benefits, but at the time it caused a great deal of unrest. In 1360 the common people had been granted a deed by the lord of the manor. This gave them the right to gather reeds, fish, fowl and any other wildlife, food etc. When Vermeulen started his drainage scheme, it had an effect on both the wildlife, which was their food, and also on employment. Things like ferrymen, swanniers for instance, they were all under threat. A whole way of life that revolved around the rivers and marshland was being lost. Vermeulen's stockade at Sandtoft was regularly attacked by the locals in an attempt to halt the work. It's also suggested that the local resentment was why this area sided with Parliament in the English Civil War against King Charles. Regardless, the drainage was completed and it turned thousands of acres of marsh into good farmland. This is the village of Belton we're passing through now. I'll just take a little detour around the back lane and go up past the old church. This is All Saints Church and dates from the 15th century. It's now a Grade 1 listed building. We're back on the A161 now, heading south. The old mill on the right there, that's Moore's Mill, and was built around 1820. There's quite a few like this remaining in the area, mainly all lost to sales long ago, and now often converted into houses. This is the old town of Epworth. It's mentioned in the Domesday Book. It's probably best known as the birthplace of John Wesley, who, along with his brother Charles, founded the Methodist Church. The Father Samuel was rector at St Andrew's Church here in the village until his death in 1735. His tomb is just outside the church. We're going to go round to the old town square and stop for a few minutes just to have a look round. There's a couple of interesting buildings there. That's the old Manor Court house, but today it's owned by the Mechanics' Institute and functions as a library. The current building dates from 1803, but it replaces a much earlier one. In front of it is the remains of the old Market Cross. Its age is uncertain, but it was almost certainly there in medieval times. Across the square we've got the Red Lion Inn, which is an old coaching inn. After the Wesleys left Epworth, John would return every 2 years. He stayed in this inn and would stand on the steps of the old cross opposite to preach. We'll pop round the corner now and take a look at the old rectory, as that's got some interesting history. The building dates from 1709 and it was built by Samuel Wesley to replace a much earlier rectory. The previous one being a half-timbered structure and was destroyed by fire. Samuel wasn't liked by the locals. He was a royalist, a Tory and an academic. The property, crops and even livestock were all targeted by the locals who wanted to drive the family out of Epworth. The old house was badly damaged by fire in 1702, but they actually repaired it that time. 7 years later though, it was burned again, and this time it was completely destroyed. John, who was only 5 at the time, had to be rescued from an upstairs window. They got him out just before the roof fell in. Now the story goes that the fire was started by the locals in yet another attempt to drive the Wesleys out of Epworth, although there was no proof of this. An interesting tale nevertheless. We've left Epworth now and we're just passing Burnham Mill. Those millstones being used as gate posts on the right there may well be from the mill. We've arrived at Haxey now. We're just going to stop off at the War Memorial for a quick picture and just pay our respects. Haxey was the ancient capital of the Isle of Axholme, but much of the original village was destroyed by fire in 1741. It's probably most famous for the annual contest of the Haxey Hood. Now this is a mass participation game that can involve up to 400 people. It's effectively a giant football scrum called the sway that tries to get a leather tube called the hood to one of 4 pubs. The King's Head here on the left is one of the pubs. There are 2 more in Haxey and the 4th, the Carpenter's Arms, is in West Woodside. That's the next village. It takes place on the 12th day of Christmas, which is January the 6th, and can take a couple of hours before a winner emerges, but it has been known to carry on into the night. There's a fair bit of ceremony that goes with the game and involves 12 umpires called boggins who dress in red coats and flowered hats, and a fool who dresses in rags. The fool starts the proceedings off by making a speech to the crowd whilst being ceremonially smoked by a fire. There's a little memorial to it here on the green. The inscription reads, "Oos again oos, toon again toon. If a man meets a man, knock him doon, but doen't at him." That translates as house against house, town against town. If a man meets a man, knock him down, but don't hurt him. These words are spoken by the fool to end his speech before the hood is tossed to the crowd and the game begins. The half-timbered looking building on the right here, that's the Loco, the second pub. And next up, just here, we've got the Duke William. That's all three pubs in Haxey. At the top end of the village, we've got the 12th century St Nicholas Church. This is a Grade 1 listed building. Now there's an old mounting stone just outside the church, and that's where the fool stands to make his speech. We're heading up Tower Hill now and out of Haxey. Just over the hill we come to West Woodside. This is the other town involved in the Haxey Hood. The pub just on the right here on the corner, that's the Carpenter's Arms, and it's the fourth pub that contends for possession of the hood. It's about 3/4 of a mile from the Carpenter's Arms to the Duke William in Haxey, then another half-mile down to the King's Head, so you get an idea of the area covered by the sway. The contest's been going on for about 700 years, so the official legend behind the game dates back to the 14th century. The wife of a local nobleman, Lady de Mowbray, was passing through the village and dropped her hood, which blew away. Some locals chased and caught it, and she was so amused by the event that she donated land to the village on condition that the event was reenacted every year. I've just covered the basics here, but there's loads of more in-depth information about the Haxey Hood on the internet if you're interested. We've just passed the old village duck pond there, and we're leaving West Woodside and heading up Idle Bank back to the top end of the Isle of Axholme. Coming to the hamlet of Santoff now. This is where Cornelius Vermeulen had his stockade back in the 1600s when doing the land drainage. It's also where RAF Santoff was built in 1944, mainly taken over for industrial and car storage now, but some of the runways and aprons still exist. This is Santoff Trolleybus Museum, which is actually on part of the old airbase. The RAF base was operated by Bomber Command as a satellite station for RAF Foldingworth. They flew Halifaxes and Lancasters from here. In 1953 it was allocated to the US Air Force, though they never actually occupied it, and in 1955 it returned to the Air Ministry. Today it's home to Santoff Flying Club and the Yorkshire Aero Club. It operates on a weekend. It's also got a great cafe, and that's where we're headed now. This is the Happy Cafe, and I can thoroughly recommend it. If you come at a weekend, you can often watch planes landing and taking off. It is a popular place and gets quite busy at times. Right, that's me all refreshed, so I'm going to wrap it up here and head off home. Hope you found this little trip round the Isle of Axholme interesting. If you have, don't forget to leave a like, drop me a comment, and if you want to watch more of my ramblings, please subscribe to the channel. Hope you can join me again, so cheers for now.